The prayer nobody sees is changing everything about your life right now, and most people have no idea this is even happening. While everyone chases visibility, builds platforms, and measures spiritual growth by what can be posted or shared, there is something occurring in silent rooms that holds more power than anything happening on stages or screens. When the door closes and nobody is watching, when words are spoken into what feels like empty air, when knees hit the floor in ordinary bedrooms with zero audience and zero validation, heaven responds in ways that reshape destinies completely. This is about solitary prayer, the kind done in secret, and what actually happens in the invisible realm every single time someone chooses to seek God where no human eye can see. The shocking truth is that these hidden moments are not the minor league version of real spirituality. They are the epicenter where battles are decided, where circumstances begin to shift before any visible sign appears, and where the trajectory of entire lives bends in response to words that never get recorded or repeated to anyone else. What is about to be revealed will completely reframe how this practice is understood, because the mechanics of what occurs in that hidden place operate on principles most have never considered, and the consequences reach further than logic would ever suggest. The abandonment of this practice rarely stems from disbelief in its theoretical importance. Most who drift away from solitary prayer do so because expectation collides with experience, because the mind wanders into endless corridors of thought while attempting to focus, because nothing dramatic occurs to validate the effort invested. There emerges a quiet frustration born from comparing internal spiritual life with the polished presentations others display, a creeping suspicion that perhaps this private discipline belongs to another era or applies only to those with certain temperaments. The silence of the room becomes oppressive rather than sacred. The absence of immediate emotional response transforms into evidence of failure, and the entire endeavor begins to feel like speaking into a void that returns nothing but echo. Yet this interpretation misses entirely what Scripture reveals about the mechanics of heaven's response to hidden devotion. When Jesus instructed followers to enter their rooms, close their doors, and pray to the Father who exists in secret, the instruction carried implications that extend far beyond a preference for privacy. The teaching establishes a spiritual principle that operates independently of human perception, one that assigns supreme value not to the visibility of religious activity, but to the depth of encounter occurring beyond the reach of external validation. Within the confines of solitude, something becomes possible that cannot exist in shared spaces. Masks constructed over years of social navigation lose their adhesive in the absence of observers. Defenses erected to protect vulnerability from judgment crack open when no human witness remains to form opinions. Words finally escape without the internal editor that shapes them for palatability or impression. Consider how certain conversations only happen after midnight, when everyone else sleeps and darkness provides a veil that makes honesty feel less dangerous. The same principle governs spiritual communication in hidden places. What remains unspoken in corporate settings, what gets edited out of public prayers, what stays locked behind the fear of appearing weak or faithless, suddenly finds permission to surface. This raw honesty, stripped of performance and pretense, creates the exact frequency heaven responds to most powerfully. Scripture records consistently that God treasures this kind of vulnerable approach. The Psalms overflow with language that would sound inappropriate in polished religious contexts. Yet these unfiltered expressions of desperation, anger, confusion, and grief are preserved as sacred text, precisely because they represent genuine encounter. Heaven does not require eloquence or theological precision. The prayers that move divine response are often those that barely form coherent sentences, that emerge as groans too deep for articulation, that consist more of tears than words. Many spiritual blockages that persist despite knowledge, despite community involvement, despite consuming endless teaching content, exist not because of hidden sin or demonic resistance, but because of prayers offered without interior presence. Requests made while the mind drifts. Petitions recited from memory without engagement. Conversations with God that happen entirely on the surface while the heart remains locked behind walls of busyness and distraction. The restoration of authentic spiritual life begins in the hidden place, not because privacy holds inherent power, but because solitude strips away everything except what is real. There exists no one to impress, no reputation to maintain, no image to protect. The person kneeling alone faces the choice to either engage truthfully or to continue the charade for an audience of one who already sees everything. Most discover that pretense becomes impossible to sustain in that environment, and in the collapse of false presentation, genuine connection finally becomes available. Yet understanding the value of honest expression in solitude reveals only part of what makes hidden prayer so transformative. What happens beyond the visible realm in response to words spoken in secret operates according to principles that defy human logic and measurement. The narrative of Daniel provides crucial insight into this invisible dimension. When he committed to seeking God despite threats to his safety, when he continued his pattern of private prayer even after it became illegal, when he persisted in turning toward Jerusalem 3 times daily to pour out his heart in an empty room, heaven responded by dispatching an answer immediately. The messenger carrying that response encountered resistance in the unseen realm, a conflict that delayed arrival for 21 days while Daniel continued praying without any indication that anything was happening. Had he evaluated effectiveness based on immediate results or emotional confirmation, he would have concluded that his prayers accomplished nothing. The reality proved opposite. From the very first moment words left his lips in that hidden place, movement began in dimensions beyond human sight. Battles were fought, resistance was overcome, and destiny was altered, all while the physical circumstances appeared unchanged. This pattern repeats throughout Scripture and throughout the experience of those who maintain hidden devotion regardless of visible feedback. The room where solitary prayer occurs becomes a strategic location, a point of intersection between natural and supernatural realms. Words that sound small and ordinary to human ears carry legal and spiritual weight in heavenly courts. Declarations made in weakness and uncertainty release processes that ripple through circumstances, relationships, and spiritual atmospheres. The analogy of sending communication helps clarify this principle. When someone drafts a message and sends it, whether through physical mail or electronic channels, the feelings present at the moment of sending do not determine whether the message arrives at its destination or produces its intended effect. The communication travels, reaches its target, and generates response independent of the emotional state of the sender. Similarly, prayers offered in secret initiate movement regardless of whether they are accompanied by powerful feelings or spiritual euphoria. The efficacy rests not in the subjective experience of the one praying, but in the faithfulness of the one receiving those prayers. If you have stayed this far, something within recognizes the truth being expressed here. This content exists for those who understand that real spiritual transformation happens away from crowds and cameras. There is more to discover about what occurs in hidden places, teachings that strengthen and establish rather than entertain. Exploring these principles further means joining others who take this dimension of faith seriously, who refuse to reduce spiritual life to what can be displayed and validated externally. The prayer offered in solitude accomplishes something beyond producing answers to specific requests. Over time, through repetition and return, through showing up in that hidden place even when nothing feels different, internal structures begin to strengthen. Consider how physical training works. Someone who lifts weights or runs consistently does not observe dramatic change from session to session. The individual workout feels unremarkable, sometimes even disappointing. Yet across weeks and months, capacity increases, endurance builds, and what once felt impossible becomes manageable. The cumulative effect of small, repeated actions generates transformation that cannot be rushed or manufactured through intensity alone. The same principle governs spiritual development through hidden prayer. Each time someone chooses to turn away from distraction, to silence the noise of constant input, to sit in stillness and direct attention toward God, despite wandering thoughts and emotional flatness, something is being built internally. Scripture speaks of strengthening the inner person, of being established in faith, of growing in spiritual understanding. These processes rarely announce themselves dramatically. They occur beneath the surface, in places where measurement proves impossible and progress feels non-existent. Yet when someone looks backward across months or years of maintaining this practice, the evidence becomes undeniable. Patterns that once controlled behavior lose their grip. Reactions that were automatic and destructive gradually shift toward wisdom and restraint. Discernment develops that allows navigation of complex situations with clarity that would have been impossible earlier. Sensitivity to spiritual atmosphere increases, making manipulation and deception easier to detect. These changes do not arrive suddenly or completely. They emerge slowly, almost imperceptibly, until one day there is recognition that something fundamental has shifted, that the person responding to circumstances is not quite the same person who began showing up in that hidden place months or years before. This transformation remains invisible to most observers, but it changes everything about how life is experienced and navigated. Understanding prayer as merely personal intimacy or emotional connection misses its fuller function. The hidden place serves not only as a space for vulnerable encounter, but also as a location of legal and spiritual positioning. Scripture describes approaching the throne of grace with confidence, presenting petitions and supplications, laying burdens before the one who invites that kind of access. This language carries weight that extends beyond metaphor. There exist spiritual realities operating according to principles and laws established by divine authority. Prayer functions as the means by which those on earth engage with heavenly jurisdiction, bringing situations under divine attention and inviting intervention into circumstances that otherwise remain bound by natural limitation or spiritual opposition. When someone enters their room, closes the door, and begins addressing God concerning specific situations, relationships, struggles, or injustices, something occurs in dimensions beyond physical sight. Cases are presented. Accusations are answered. Strongholds are challenged. Patterns are interrupted. The comparison to legal proceedings provides insight here. In courtrooms, words spoken by authorized representatives carry power to alter outcomes, to release those held captive, to overturn previous judgments, to establish new precedents. The effectiveness of those words does not depend on volume or emotional delivery, but on the authority backing them and the legal framework within which they operate. Similarly, prayers offered in secret by those who belong to God through faith carry authority that reaches beyond the natural realm. Declarations made in weakness and simplicity bind and loose, open and close, release and restrict according to principles established by the kingdom of heaven. This is not mystical thinking or wishful projection. Scripture consistently presents prayer as active engagement in spiritual reality, as participation in battles being fought beyond human sight, as the mechanism through which heaven's will is invited and released into earthly situations. Most spiritual warfare teaching focuses on dramatic confrontations, on loud declarations and aggressive tactics. Yet the most effective warfare often happens in the quiet, sustained by those who consistently show up in hidden places to pray when nothing appears to be happening. The enemy fears sustained, quiet, persistent prayer far more than occasional bursts of intense spiritual activity. Patterns that have operated for generations within families can be broken by someone who refuses to stop praying in secret, despite lack of immediate change. Spiritual atmospheres over communities shift when enough individuals commit to hidden intercession regardless of visible confirmation. The visible confrontations and breakthroughs that eventually manifest trace back to prayers offered in rooms where no one witnessed and no one applauded. As understanding deepens regarding what actually occurs in hidden prayer, the experience of entering that place begins to shift. What once felt like mere obligation or empty ritual becomes recognized as participation in something genuinely powerful and necessary. The frustration over lack of immediate results gives way to confidence that response is occurring beyond what can be measured or observed. The comparison with others fades as it becomes clear that this dimension of spiritual life cannot be evaluated according to external metrics. What matters is not whether anyone else knows about the consistency of showing up in that hidden place, not whether testimony can be given about dramatic results, not whether the practice produces content worthy of sharing publicly. What matters is the actual transformation occurring beneath the surface, the strengthening happening where only God sees, the movements being initiated in response to words spoken into apparent emptiness. Consider how most significant change in human life happens gradually rather than suddenly. The decision to forgive after years of holding resentment does not usually arrive in one explosive moment, but through hundreds of small choices made in private, through prayers whispered when no one else is around, through repeated surrender of the right to revenge in conversations held only with God. The breakthrough in understanding that finally brings clarity to confusion rarely comes during the teaching moment but later, in silence, when information connects with something deeper during solitary reflection and prayer. The strength to walk away from destructive patterns builds not in the moment of public commitment, but through countless private encounters where temptation is brought before God again and again until its power finally breaks. These are the real changes that matter, the ones that last beyond emotional highs and external pressure. They happen in hidden places, forged through the repeated practice of showing up alone to pray even when nothing feels different. The spiritual life presented in Scripture stands in stark contrast to the version promoted through much contemporary religious culture. Jesus consistently directed attention away from public displays and toward hidden devotion. He criticized those who prayed loudly on street corners to be seen and praised those who gave in secret. He withdrew regularly from crowds to spend time alone with the Father, despite constant demands for his attention and ministry. The apostles followed this pattern, emphasizing the importance of prayer that happens away from observation, teaching that power in public ministry flows from what occurs in private encounter. The testimony of those who have walked with God across decades consistently points to the same reality. Whatever effectiveness emerges in visible arenas, whatever fruit appears in ministry or influence, whatever impact touches others always traces back to what happened in hidden places. The public dimension is real and valuable, but it grows from roots that remain unseen. This creates tension for those immersed in cultures that measure everything by visibility, engagement, and immediate feedback. The hidden prayer life cannot be quantified or displayed. There exists no metric for consistency in showing up to pray when no one is watching. No recognition for the battles fought in secret, no validation for the transformation occurring beneath the surface. Yet those who persist in this practice despite the absence of external reward discover something that cannot be found any other way. They develop a stability that circumstances cannot shake, a confidence that does not depend on approval, a clarity that cuts through confusion, and a peace that defies explanation. These qualities emerge not from technique or intensity, but from sustained, simple, repeated choosing to be present in the hidden place regardless of how it feels. The transformation produced by solitary prayer reveals itself not in sudden dramatic shifts, but in the way decisions begin to be made differently. Where there was once impulsive reaction, there appears space for wisdom. Where there was paralysis in the face of complexity, there emerges capacity to move forward with discernment. Where there was vulnerability to manipulation and pressure, there develops ability to recognize truth and maintain boundaries. These changes happen slowly, often unnoticed until someone looks back and realizes that something fundamental has shifted. The person praying alone in that room month after month is being changed, not by the practice itself, but through consistent exposure to the presence of the one being addressed in those prayers. Transformation occurs through sustained contact, through repeated return, through showing up even when nothing seems to happen. What must be understood is that the process remains ongoing. There is no arrival point where hidden prayer becomes unnecessary, no level of maturity that graduates someone beyond the need for this foundational practice. The strengthening continues. The transformation deepens. The response to prayers offered in secret keeps moving through visible and invisible dimensions. The next time that door closes and that quiet space is entered, it will not be merely habit or obligation being fulfilled. It will be participation in something that genuinely alters reality, that shifts trajectories, that releases movement in realms beyond human sight. The room remains ordinary, the practice stays simple, the words may still feel inadequate, but what is actually happening extends far beyond what can be seen or measured. The invitation stands always available, the access remains open, and heaven responds to what occurs when someone chooses to seek God away from every human observer, bringing nothing but honesty and showing up regardless of how it feels or what immediate results appear. Everything changes in that hidden place, even when no one else ever knows.